Welcome to the
Let me.
uh-huh.
Never mind. Sorry. Yeah. Never mind.
Okay. Welcome to the VAPALS ELCAP working group meeting. Uh, this is Wednesday, January 30th, 2019. I This is your usual notification that we will be recording this call today, and I will be putting it on YouTube so that people who were not able to make it can watch it, or if anybody is needing some help going to sleep, they can listen to it again. Um, Hopefully will be a little bit more interesting than that. Uh, Today we'll be talking about the follow-up form, which Matt is going to show us, and then and I will actually give Matt the talking stick so that he can start getting his thing ready. And then we will also be talking about XINDEX and getting ready for certification um, with regard to XINDEX. So, Matt, it looks like we can see your screen. So, oh, and this looks like CPRS.
This is CPRS. You
Oh,
want me to start showing the demonstration here?
yes, please.
Okay. So most people, when they come in to VAPALS ELCAP, will probably start in CPRS, and there's a tool menu that has VAPALS. It probably will be changed to VAPALS ELCAP up there. And you simply just click on that, and it will bring you into whatever patient that you were in. And I actually don't want this patient right here. We're going to take a look at the follow-up form today. And so I'm going to go back to CPRS. I'm going to choose a new patient. And this time I'm going to choose this third one down here and say OK. And what's cool about this is then when you go to VAPALS, it will do one of two things. If the patient has never been enrolled in LCAP, then it will take you to the registration screen and say, do you really want to register this patient? However, if they've already had and then from there it will take you right to the intake form. But once they've had their intake done, it will take you to the case review screen. This is called the case review screen. And this is patient-centric. It's only about this one patient right here. And so what we can see from this screen is that we can see all the different forms that have been done on this patient regarding the LCAP program. You can also do actions. You can look at the reports, which are basically generated from the corresponding forms, or you can start a new form. And that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to start a new form. So once they've come in, you only do one intake form, and then after that, when they come in, you're going to do a follow-up form. And so we're going to create a new form, a follow-up form here, and you basically fill in the different fields. Now, some of these are mandatory, and some of them are not. If they're mandatory, you'll see a little red asterisk. So the date, which is normally today's date, and the baseline study, and that's a little tricky. It doesn't fill that in. So you have to, from that original screen, kind of remember, and I do, when that baseline CT was done on this patient, which was here. And then the coordinator will say is me. And then you go down here, and the first thing you come across is this ordering information, and it says it's required only for Medicare, Medicaid patients. Most of them probably will have that as a primary or secondary insurance. You're probably going to be filling this out. And are we going to order screening, we're going to say yes. Ordered by whom? I'll say me. Here's my provider number. And then this documentation of decision sharing, this is required for the very first one, the baseline. It's not required for this, but we like to do decision making sharing, so we're going to say yes. And let's say that this is a current smoker. Now sometimes let's just put this in. Let's say that there's 30 pack years, and there's no quit years because it's a current smoker. Reported asymptomatic. Let's say no. Let's say that this the clinical information is this is someone with 30 pack years and a cough, productive cough or whatever. Have you taken antibiotics? We'll say no. Is this the annual? We'll say no. Well, obviously, if you're smoking, then that's going to be less than 5 years ago. Past years, have you had any symptoms? We'll say just a productive cough. And have you seen a physician for this? And we'll just say the PCP. Are you experiencing them now? Yes. When did you most recently have a CT? I think it's about 8 or 9 months ago. And then you get these questions. Now the thing is, if you try to submit this form, what's nice about it is that it will go right to the parts that you forgot to fill out or you missed when you were trying to submit the form and you hadn't completed it. So this is kind of nice. Have you been hospitalized? Now some of these, when you say yes, you'll get an additional fields to fill. We're just going to say no. Have you had a cancer diagnosis in the past? Again, if you say yes, they're going to want to know more about it. Say no. If cancer is diagnosed, have you had surgery? These two fields right here probably need an NA, and I'll talk to Dom about that, because if you're saying no up here, then it's these are probably NAs. Over the past month, have you smoked cigarettes, even a puff? Well, we say we're current, so obviously we have. This is asking how many days a week you smoke. Well, I smoke 7. And how much do I smoke? We'll say 1 pack. How many packs? Yeah, 1 pack. And let's just say we started, our last cigarette was today. But in spite of all that, I have tried to quit smoking. And in fact, I've tried 3 times and was able to do it for at least 24 hours. I tried a couple different methods. And I'm still serious about quitting smoking. So this tells the coordinator that there's something they can do about it. Perhaps some intervention they can do to help. And then finally, you just submit it. And you can see that you can't generate the report yet, but all the information's there for us to generate a report and get that into Vista. And basically, that's how the follow-up form works. So if there's any questions or comments.
Would you mind, Matt, going over it again in less detail, just telling us the steps? So that we could test it. Just going over it again, but just quickly, the main steps.
Okay, so the main steps basically are basically you want to you want to give the follow-up date, which is usually today's date, and the date of the baseline CT. And then what they want, Sam, is they want any pertinent information that that may be clinically useful between the last time that this patient was interviewed and now. And since this is about LCAP, it's all about their smoking history. So so basically, almost all, if you'll look, almost all of these fields are mandatory. And basically what the fields are is, well, have you been smoking? Are you interested in quitting? And then, is there progression of your disease? Have you taken antibiotics? Have you experienced any symptoms? Have you been diagnosed with cancer? So those are the main sections. Are you know, what's happened in the last between the time period that you were seen last and the time period and today, and then this last section kind of gets to the idea that there's good data that shows that when a healthcare professional intervenes with smoking, that there's a much higher likelihood that somebody's going to quit when they just ask these questions, and then when they provide help. There's fairly good data that says that's a useful thing to do, and so that's what this last thing is doing, is trying to be an advocate to smoking cessation, and that's basically how it works.
All right.
Does that answer your questions?
I say a little bit. I'm trying to just get a feel of how the system is going to be used. So it looks like the part I got from you is this is a follow-up form. So can you remind us of the initial form that a patient fills out, and then after the initial form, what is the follow-up form?
Sure.
Rick has a diagram that might be helpful for showing this. So if you don't mind, Matt, I'm going to change to Rick so that he, as presenter, so that he can show that diagram.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, so this is a diagram that's going to get updated again. There have been some revisions to some of the forms, especially some revisions to the intake and screening process that comes right at the beginning. But in general, as a sort of a large-scale picture, this is still a more or less accurate, sense of how the software is used overall in order to try to support these medical protocols that the ILCAP team have developed over the years. So let's take a quick look at the top. This is the legend for the form that follows, and part of what we're trying to say is that there are forms you have to fill out, there are actions you have to take, there are delay periods, there's decisions to make, and in some cases there's combinations. Like, for example, if you're going to do a CT scan, then you need to produce a CT evaluation form. And if there has been a delay before what you do, for example, if you say come back in a month or come back in 3 months or 6 months or a year, then anytime there's been a delay, before you take the next action, you fill out a follow-up form. And if we if we put this into a larger context, what we see is that when you very first begin with a patient, you go through a screening process to try to decide who to reach out to. Once you have somebody who for sure you want to interact with in the program, at least to find out if they want to enter, but hopefully more than that, you do. Now at this point it says an intake form, but we're in the process, the ILCAP folks and the VA folks together are in the process of overhauling the exact nature of what happens at this step, whether it's one form or multiple forms, or this may shift, but some form of intake process takes place where you interview the patient and you collect some information about them that's necessary to establish whether they're eligible to participate, for example, in the program, whether they're likely to have issues, and so forth. There's this optional background form. When we first began the project, it was going to be required, and now it's optional, but it's a place to collect a lot of demographics, including some health information that's very valuable to the nurse navigators when they're thinking about the process. But once that's done, however much of this takes place, if they're approved, if it looks like they would benefit from going through the screening process, it's overall divided into two parts. There is this first stage called the baseline screen. And there's one set of rules that governs what happens here, and it starts with the introduction of the CT scan, following however much of the intake and background form were filled out. I'm going to come back to it in a moment, but I want you to understand, first you do that, you make a bunch of decisions, and if they stay in the program, if they look like they have issues, then after 12 months, if nothing else happens, after 12 months, you enter a new stage called the annual screen. And the idea is that, for example, if we didn't find anything, but you have a genetic predisposition and you're highly likely to get lung cancer, then you're going to come back once a year and get another CT scan. Likewise, if we do discover something, but it turns out to be, maybe you had valley fever that, just looked for a bit like lung cancer and it got sorted out, or maybe you did have lung cancer and it was removed and you're better now, you don't have anything showing on the CT scans, then again, after a year, you come back for the annual screen, which again begins with a CT scan. And because there's been this delay, what happens after the 12 months is a follow-up form. You basically can't get into a CT scan under this methodology without either at the beginning filling out some part of the intake and background form so we know who you are and what your medical conditions are, or if there's been a delay, instead of filling those out again, you fill out a follow-up form. It isn't shown here, but it's shown up here in the legend. Whenever there's been a delay, a follow-up form comes before what happens next. So the 1-year delay is followed by a follow-up form and then the CT scan, which includes filling out a CT form. So this is kind of the overall picture, is that as you go through these stages, whenever there's a mandatory medical delay for some reason, like to allow a medicine to take effect or to give us time to see how a treatment worked, then when they come back and they're going to do another scan, we always hit the follow-up form again. That's how it plays into that. So going back to the baseline screen, just to give an idea, you can sort of see some of the decision making going on here. That's as the radiologist fills out the CT evaluation form after performing the CT scan according to the ILCAP protocols, they're then answering a number of questions like, how many nodules, are they calcified or not, do they have solid components, and so forth. And based on these yes and no decisions, they arrive at conclusions like, could this be the flu, in which case we do something, could it be a non-malignant tumor, could it be, and based on each thing, there's different things that you do, based on each conclusion that's reached. So this is the overall top level picture, and this is the thing that the nurse navigators and the radiologists who are performing the scans and the committee in charge of VAPALS ELCAP protocols at the hospital together we'll be going through these and using the software to support them in collecting the information along the way and making the decisions. So this is sort of the top level picture of the flow. And this diagram, although it is going to get updated a little bit beyond this is still pretty close. But the thing I want to say about it is that this is the result of 17 plus years of medical protocols being carried out outside of VA by the ILCAP and ILCART folks around the world, the international team that's been developing these protocols. So this is what the software is mimicking. And every time we talk about a form, what we're talking about is it fits at some place in this process to support some stage of the decision making. So this gives you some sense of where the follow-up is. Once we get a final version of this form, after we get a final version of the intake process, it'll end up in the user manuals. It'll be one of the things that's readily available to everyone who has the software. So I'll pause here for questions, comments, or concerns. But I was hoping that this would help to give some context for what Matt just showed us.
It certainly does. I'm really looking for something like, this is how a typical user would use the software in these stages, like in stages, so that when we test it, we know what we're testing and what things we need to click on.
Exactly. And the user manual, for example, we're looking at getting it structured to where it corresponds to these flows and it corresponds to what the users are doing. So it'll be matching up the medical protocols with the software protocols so that you can see how everything fits together.
And if that doesn't cover it, once we've submitted, let me know and I can put something in the technical journal article and resubmit it.
So, okay, Rick went on for a while. I just want a summary in maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs of, like, you start with the intake form and then you run the background form. Then periodically you do the, what's the next one form? The patient update form, is it called? Or time update?
The follow-up.
Follow-up form. And then when a CT scan happens, you have to fill out, what's the form you fill out with the CT scan?
The CT evaluation form.
CT evaluation form. Okay, good. And how many more? Are there more forms besides 1, 2, 3? Then, okay. Oh, okay, this is good. I guess this covers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are there just 6 forms total?
For our what we're going to be turning in, I think there's going to be 5 forms, maybe 6.
Okay.
And other forms will be added later, but won't be included in the first version.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, I think I understand it now. So I actually like the first diagram better. It's much smaller. Everything fits on one page, but it's missing that start part where it has the intake in the background.
I'll provide something like that, what
Okay.
I think you're asking for in the technical journal article.
Okay. Well, just to help me and Joe, know how to test it.
Of course. Yep.
Yeah, the short version is that you never do a CT scan without following it by a CT evaluation form, and you never do a CT scan without preceding it by collecting patient demographics. So if it's the first time you've seen the patient, you collect it through the intake and background forms. But if it's any time after that, you collect any changes in the follow-up form.
That's perfect. That is the one sentence summary I'm looking for. That's really good. That explains everything.
I think Ken and Linda can work together to produce a stripped-down version of this form that really simplifies and gives a top-level picture of it for you. And then Linda can include that in the journal article.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent question, Sam. Thanks.
Any more questions about the follow-up form or our not quite correct anymore, but close diagrams here? Okay. Well, in that case, I think we will move on to the next subject, which we were going to cover, and this is how to use XINDEX to find errors that need to be fixed for certification. And I know that's a very simplified explanation, but I'm sure Rick will give us a much more complete explanation next.
So for those of you who are on for the medical side and the user-facing side, that part of this call is done. We're now shifting to the technical side that has to do with how the OSEHRA certification team and how the programming team associated with VAPALS ELCAP are going to are identifying and resolving problems that need to be fixed during certification. It's also giving some indication of the kind of work that we're doing right now, because the work that most of us are focusing on right now is on getting the code to meet the VA standards and conventions and to satisfy XINDEX as closely as possible, as well as bringing up the unit test count to ensure that it gets a smooth passage through OSEHRA certification. So if you're not a techie, this part probably isn't for you, but feel free to stay on if you're curious. we'll try to explain things in a in an accessible way, even though it's technical. So the idea is that the VA has established programming standards and conventions that say, of all the things you could do with the programming language, what are you allowed to do? And they try to steer us away from doing things that would lock us into a vendor. They steer us away from things that would lock us into a particular hardware or operating system platform to make sure that as computers change over time, as hardware changes over time, the Vista software has to be able to surf the wave, as it were. And that was how the VA started out with PDPs and then upgraded to VAXs and then introduced PCs. And now they're moving away from VMS and Windows and running on Unix systems. And all that's possible because all the programmers who develop Vista follow these standards and conventions that say, don't do something that ties your code too closely to the platform underneath. And instead, we create an infrastructure layer of the software, and it's its job to handle that low-level stuff and insulate the rest of Vista from it. So it limits the amount of places we have to change if we want to move to a new platform. That's a big part of what the standards and conventions are about. And in addition to that, some of the standards and conventions rules are about making sure the software is user-friendly, that it's usable, that lessons that have been learned the hard way over the decades about what doesn't work for users and what does work, that we follow the patterns that are productive. So one of the tools that we use to establish these things to help us figure out if our code is scary or not, shall we say, is XINDEX. And XINDEX originally was written by Bob Lusheen, the late Bob Lusheen of Heinz ISC, who did great work for many years, and I think he contributed a lot of work in the Vista dietetics application as well as other things. He was either in the underground or came on very shortly after that. And then Wally Fort picked it up at the San Francisco ISC and has been developing it for years since then. And now I think our very own Sam Habiel, right, did some work on XINDEX. So it's continuing to have new generations of programmers working on upgrading it.
And Christopher Edwards too, by the way.
Ah, yes. All our thanks to Christopher. And Joel, did you work on it too?
On occasion, but is this the new version?
Yes.
That the VA has that they haven't released? Because they've got one that they haven't released that meets the new standards. But
yeah, that's actually the one, Joel. It's the one plus our changes, and our changes are theoretically going back in the VA version.
Right.
As long as they got through their current power struggles. But that's
they just can't get this released in the VA. That's all.
Yeah, but the rest of us can follow it. Yeah, in the VA, they're in the unfortunate situation where the version of XINDEX they have is out of date and tells you that things are legal or illegal that actually don't match the current standards and conventions, which is problematic. So we're lucky doing this development in the OSEHRA community outside of the VA. That the community was able to do the necessary work to make sure that we're all shifting over to this new XINDEX that matches the VA standards and conventions. It's I think quite a challenge for folks inside the VA without this tool, with an out of date one, to try to figure out whether Vista code is compliant or not. It requires a lot of manual labor and it requires a lot of decision making. You have to be much clearer about the SAC. So for the moment, let's just pick a couple of routines to use as examples. I'm going to start with one of our, SAMI is the namespace that we use for the VAPALS ELCAP application that's installed into Vista. And I'm going to just pick routine SAMI log. We start by going to the routine itself over here. This is SAMI log. It's almost entirely the work of Larry Carlson. Maybe it is entirely the work of Larry Carlson. And it's just a simple little tool to help us toggle on and off for an environment, whether or not it's going to challenge you to enter username and password. This is extremely valuable when you're working in certification and development and testing environments, because being able to say, no, let's not ask for access and verify code every single time I sign on is useful when you're signing on over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and like a whole lot more than that in the course of an hour as you're fixing something, trying it again, fixing something, trying it again. And then when it's working, you can then toggle it back on. And we wanted to make this a lot easier and not have people having to run around figuring out which files and which fields they had to update. So this is not something that's facing to the outside. This isn't a hackable moment. It doesn't do any good to hackers that this exists. It has to be called from programmer mode. There's no web services that allow you to get into it. So that's the basic tool, and that's its intentions. The code is sort of, there's a number of us programming on this project, and we're all working on different flavors of some related styles, but not identical to each other. But we're trying to make sure that our code matches the standards and conventions. So you'll see some things that we're doing that the VA doesn't do so much, like the use of lowercase commands and lowercase functions, which the SAC allows and XINDEX allows, but a lot of people aren't doing it yet. But we're not doing it consistently, because some of us are still converting over from having done everything in uppercase. And the SAC doesn't let you do lowercase if it's an intrinsic special variable like $horolog, which gives you time. So there's some rules about when you can capitalize and when you don't capitalize.
Well, I think it lets. I think the SAC doesn't say anything about, unless you read it more closely than I did. Does it really say you can't use lowercase $H?
It really says you can't use lowercase intrinsic special variables. Yes, it does. I've taught some classes on this to our team in the last month or two. So we walked everybody through the clauses. It's disappointing. I think it's an oversight. I think they just missed it. And maybe some future SAC will fix that and allow the use of lowercase. And then there's also rules about when you're allowed to use lowercase variables of your own, as long as the variable is nude, as long as it's locally scoped, so that it's not being passed between different applications. It's okay. It can even be lowercase if it's being passed between subroutines, but they all belong to us. There are subroutines. But the moment that we're passing between our application and some other application, like if we're passing variables into File Manager or into Lab or something like that, or CPRS, those have to be uppercase if the thing that we're calling could change them. Right? If it's a variable that's being shared and it could be changed. So whether we're passing by reference or whether we're passing by name, if it's a variable that you're passing to another application so that they can update it for you and pass it back, then it has to be uppercase. The SAC is clear about that rule too. So there's a sort of a balance here about when you're allowed to use uppercase and lowercase. And XINDEX is surprisingly far along in helping us with this. Oops, let me not change the routine itself here. Let me show you. So this is I'm running XINDEX now. I'm passing it the name of the routine that I was just showing you, SAMI log, which I chose because it has a remarkably undramatic report coming back from it. We'll shift to routines that generate more errors in a little bit here, but this will give us a little start. And so I'm not doing anything tricky. I'm not basically these prompts I'm skipping give us the ability to collect whole wide groups of routines, whether because they're in a build like a patch together, or they were installed together, or they're part of a package or a namespace or what have you. We don't need any of that. I'm just doing one routine at a time here in order to isolate things and make it clear. And I'm going to start by saying, no, just give us the compiled errors and warnings. This is just a way to give us an initial report to look at. And so here it goes. We press return. Voila, no errors or warnings to report. There's nothing in here that XINDEX doesn't like. If we do a longer report, we can find out why. So if I say SAMI log, and this time I say, yes, I do want more than errors and reports. I don't just want a summary. I'd like to print the routines. And for now, I'm just going to say regular. And I'll say, go ahead and print the errors and warnings with each routine. Not going to worry about updating the routine file. Not going to index all called routines. And again, let's just show it on the screen. And again, no errors or warnings to report overall. If we press return, we're gonna see the normal XINDEX report for a given routine. So let's scroll up to the top of that. And so we get a nice clean printout, as XINDEX does for when you say you want a regular display. And then side by side with it, right after it comes the index itself, where he's looked at what are all the local variables we're using. And the part that we care about a lot when we're doing verification is these things in the key up here. Because what we want to see is we want to see routines that they might have been they might have been changed or killed or what have you, but we want them to have been scoped tightly. We don't want to leave garbage around in our symbol table. That's a no-no under the SAC. You're allowed to create all the variables you want, but when you're done and your subroutine quits, you can't leave them lying around for other people to clean up. So part of what XINDEX does is he tries to evaluate, can he see somewhere where you are scoping that variable or not? If he doesn't report, let's see, did any of these show up as not killed explicitly? No, none of them do. They're all nude because Larry is a very tidy programmer. So we're not going to have an example here of a problematic variable that we'd have to follow up on. This is a nice self-contained subroutine. But if we saw one here that had the double greater than sign saying, whoa, sorry, not the double greater than, if it had the, the double greater than, that's its way of trying to warn us, hey, I'm not sure where this thing got cleaned up. It says not killed explicitly, but I think that's a holdover from back before the new command existed. It should say not scoped explicitly. This is an XINDEX bug, I think. But what we see is all these variables have the little tilde. The new command, newing, newed means it was explicitly scoped. So he's happy with all these variable references, both the uppercase ones and the lowercase ones. Then we look under global variables, another object of major concern because the globals are the database. That's where the information is shared. The local variables come and go. They're just the scratch space for the routine, but the global variables are the database. And so if we kill something in the database, that's something a verifier would really like to take a look at and say, should we be killing that, or did you accidentally kill the patient file? Because if you're out there accidentally killing patient files, we don't want to certify your software. So, but as you can see, it's all modest in here. These are, in this case, just references. He's mostly just looking. And because he used update of DIE to update the file rather than doing a direct global set. And that's good too, because the SAC says if you're working on FileMan compatible globals, and all globals should be FileMan compatible, driven by the FileMan database, unless you have an exemption, which we don't, then you ought to be using the FileMan tools to update it and not doing direct global set. So there's a relationship here between what's up here and what's down here. After all, the purpose of this subroutine is to update the database to say, yes, prompt for access and verify code because we're going to go into production, or no, don't prompt for access and verify code because we're in test. Or development mode. And so we have to change the database, but we follow the SAC. We don't change it here through a direct global access. We use the tool that we should be using in FileMan to update it. So this is the message that's being given here overall by what you're seeing in this report. And as you can see, he's happy with it. There are things we might still do to this routine. For example, before OSEHRA sees it, we might go through and spell out all these commands. We're sort of getting into the habit of going for a less cryptic, kind of more beginner-friendly style of programming. And we might get more consistent about things like this set and do might go lowercase instead of being uppercase. But these are little fiddly bits. This code is fairly close to the way that we'll turn it in. I guess that's one thing. This code also doesn't have a change yet that is being rolled out across all the routines, but it'll have it soon. I see right here where it explicitly says the license is Apache 2.0. We are changing all of these routines to instead they'll say go see routine SAMI UL, and SAMI UL contains canned code for the Apache license and for credits and so forth that were agreed upon by the ILCAP VAPALS team. And so none of these will repeat it anymore. They'll just say, for our license, go see that routine. So there are a few changes you'll see here and here, but this is pretty close. And this code has also been extensively tested. It's got the unit test to go with it. So this is an example of code that's fairly close to the way you're going to see it. So let's move on to something that's less clear, that's got some issues. So I'm going to do XINDEX again, but this time I'm going to do SAMI M2M. The name is a misnomer. This routine, which may look familiar to Sam, and certainly Larry has been busy in here as well. This is a routine that creates a client for the broker that is written in mumps. So just like CPRS uses a client for the broker that's written in Delphi, And other GUI applications could use clients written in other languages, Java or Visual Basic or what have you. This is a client that was created that runs in mumps and allows one mump system to knock on the door and invoke remote procedures after establishing security rights with another mump system. And this is going to be the basis for some very important upgrades in version 2 or in later patches. And it's also used in the current version to every night fetch a list of the patients. So we need to have a list of the patients so that when you go into the sign-on form, when you sign in and you come to the homepage, you can select the patient that you want to look at the forms for. And that only works if here on our system, our VAPAL server, if we have pulled over a copy of all of the active patients, which we do every night using the broker, and which is very dependent upon this routine right here. So this is an important routine. And again, we'll start with a simple report. No, I just want the compiled errors and warnings to start with. I always do this when I'm very first doing XINDEX because you don't know if there's going to be a lot of errors or few errors or what have you. And if there's going to be lots and lots of errors and a huge amount of information, it's good to kind of take this routine and put it on a different list from the routines where you don't see anything. So I like do this first level sorting first, and then pay more attention to the ones that have problems. And I already know how this is going to come out. But for all of you playing along at home, whoa, what's that? Look at that. Unlike Sammy Log, we actually have a problem, right? And it's an interesting problem. It's an interesting problem. But before I tell you what the problem is, let's just kind of see what it tells us here. We are violating the SAC because we're using a close command. That C is the close command. And Vista applications are not allowed to use the close command. Close command is a device management command, and device management is required to all be done through the device handler, which is a Vista infrastructure application. And the reason is that device manipulation is extremely tied to hardware, operating system, and to the specific implementation of mumps. And so if Vista applications were all doing opens and closes and uses, then if we wanted to leave behind the obsolete PDP computers and move to our modern whatever it is that we're running today, we wouldn't be able to. So our software would be using features that don't exist on the new hardware. They'd be stuck in the past. And so it's important that we not be allowing close commands to proliferate throughout Vista. And that's why there's a SAC item about it, and that's why XINDEX flags this as an item. It says, hey, you shouldn't be doing the close. You should be calling %ZISC. ZIS is the device handler. Namespace C is for close. That is the tool that most Vista applications use to close a I/O device. And by doing that, they're completely insulated from whatever the ugly details happen to be. They don't have to care. And then it's only the job of the infrastructure applications to make sure the right version of %ZISC with the right features is installed for the platform that you're on right now, thus protecting you from being locked to it. So why is this here? Well, the reason this is here is that this is a broker client. He has to open and close channels. He's working channels. And as Sam already knows the answer to this because Sam and Larry had a big discussion about it. But for everybody else who's on the call, what's going on here, if we actually go look at the routine, and this is giving us a sense of what the process is like, is right? When you see an error, you kind of want to bring up the code that's associated with the error. So I'm going to look for close. There it is. Went right to it. Space C space was enough to get there. And we see that it's part of a larger subroutine with I'm just going to scroll back up so we can see the steps because it's got nice comments here to help us understand what's going on. It's called M2M, mumps to mumps. And this is the guy that's actually opening up the channel, doing the connection, and so forth. So here's where he's doing the connection across the TCP/IP channel. He pulls up the introductory message, set up for sign-on, log on. All these are the steps of kind of connecting. He creates the broker context, which establishes that he's got the security rights to be accessing that remote system, and that tells him which remote procedures he's allowed to call and which ones he's not allowed to call. Then the punchline, he actually runs the remote procedure, which is the whole point of this routine, to allow us to call a remote procedure and get the answers back from the remote server. And then when he's done, he has to let go of the channel and close the connection. And he does, first he logs out, and then he closes the connection. And this is where we have our close command. And so the question is, well, why doesn't that do %ZISC? And so the situation here is that %ZISC, the tool that every other Vista application uses to do device management, does too much. it's also managing the variables in the symbol table that describe the current device. And what it's doing is perfect for all the normal Vista applications like lab and pharmacy and so on, but it's too much for this. What we essentially have here in this SAMI namespace under SAMI M2M is a subroutine that's effectively an infrastructure subroutine. SAMI is not an infrastructure application, it's a clinical application to help you do lung cancer screening and treatment. But in order to make that work, we had to insert this subroutine that someday shouldn't live here. It should probably live in the broker, right? Because what it's actually doing is a broker function. That is, it should be part of the infrastructure. And because it's infrastructure level, it needs to be able to manipulate the variables at a more detailed level than most applications do. And because of that, it needs more control than the %ZISC will give it. If we use %ZISC here, it's going to ruin the flow of control and the symbol tables the way that it's set up, and it won't work correctly. So what we actually need is at some point this needs to go into the infrastructure, but in the short term, for purposes of certification, before we give this to OSEHRA, we're going to wrap up this little piece of activity right here and make an extension to the device handler that only exists in our dialect of Vista, in the VAPALS dialect that runs on our VAPALS servers. And it's going to include an entry point that will just do this tiny little bit of activity without all the other stuff that %ZISC does. That is, we're going to add a new application program interface to the device handler, and then we'll call that. Right? And then as a result, when you run XINDEX, he won't complain about this because this close command won't be here anymore. It won't be calling %ZISC, but it will be calling some other %ZIS entry point that we'll have created. And thus, this guy will pass. And we'll add that %ZIS change to the list in the technical manual of things that we depend upon in other applications. And we'll flag it in there and say, this is one of the things that was specifically done for this dialect of mumps. Of course, this is open source. If OSEHRA wants to adopt it and use it and have a modified ZIS, they're free to do that. But in the meantime, this gets us up and running and helps us to pass XINDEX. By doing what...
Actually, Rick, I'm just wondering, I'm actually reading %ZIS. You see that the comment says the problem is with close upcut %ZIS TCP.
Yes.
Not with %ZISC.
That's
right.
Right.
What the one we're supposed to use.
That's right.
That we're using the opposite one. So I'm wondering if actually %ZISC actually might work.
No, it also calls home of %ZIS. I mean, %ZISC I think will be a problem too.
Well, let's see. I'm looking at it. Only if IoT is set up to be termed. So there's a possibility that it might just work.
Well, that would give us a solution then.
Yeah.
And that would be a cleaner solution because then we're not having to modify the device handler. So this is the kind of discussion and thought process that needs to go on around this kind of error. This kind of error is very different from other kinds of errors that we see because it's about the division of labor between the infrastructure applications and the clinical applications. And it's telling us that we violated that because it doesn't know and it doesn't have any way of knowing that SAMI M2M is actually an infrastructure routine that someday should go in the other place. When we designed the standards and conventions in XINDEX, we didn't anticipate a situation in which the VA would not be regularly updating its infrastructure in response to clinical needs. All of this assumes that the infrastructure teams are up and going and that they have permission to improve the infrastructure to support what the clinical developers need. But that's not our situation right now, and that's why we've got this infrastructure routine inside of our clinical application. But still, you'll note, despite the fact that SAMI M2M is infrastructure, this is the only line it had a problem with, which is impressive because most infrastructure routines will make XINDEX extremely unhappy. They're just riddled with things that XINDEX is like, you probably shouldn't be doing that. It's like, well, that's okay. You don't know I'm infrastructure. But in this case, there was only the one thing. So if it turns out, we'll experiment between now and next Wednesday with substituting %ZISC for this close command. And if it works, well then voila, that's one more XINDEX item fixed. So this is the kind of activities that are going on right now over the past few months and in the remaining weeks before submission, is that we're going through looking for issues like this. Another major issue that has come up is that some of our routines have grown too much because, productive developers develop. And some of those routines like SAMI Home and SAMI Form have gotten so big they have to be split. We have to move, the SAC limits the maximum size of a MUMPS routine because we have to share our memory with all the other processes that are running, and we'd like there to be, more. On your home computer, you can use all the memory you like because it's your computer, you can do whatever you want. But, the VA computers have to be shared among all the users that are using the system. So you can't have one process being a giant hog and chewing up all the memory. So the SAC sets limits, and XINDEX enforces them and lets you know if you've made a routine that's too big. And if you do that, then he's going to complain and tell you, hey, your routine's too big. I happen to have an example right here. This is, let me return back a bit. Do a pair of XINDEX, SAMI Form 2. Now, SAMI Form 2 was originally SAMI Form. It's a generational sequel to it. And eventually, well, we'll talk about that later. If I run XINDEX on SAMI Form 2, and I say, nope, no more than compiled errors and warnings, I say, show me your errors. He's got some problems. There's some things he doesn't like here. And this version of SAMI Form 2, I want you to look at the count of the bytes. It's at 19,513. I have a version on my laptop where I did some work on this routine, adding some comments, but more importantly, spelling out commands and breaking up some kind of terse structures. And it easily went, as you would expect from something so close to the 20,000 limit, it easily went over the 20,000 limit. In general, there was a convention established by the FileMan team in the VA back in the early 1990s that we should never release a routine that's nudging right up to the limit. Because even if you just squeak by now, what happens with patch 1 or patch 2 or patch 3 when you have to add something to it? And what if those are emergency patches and really you'd like to get the fix out in 5 minutes, not a whole lot later? If it pushes you over the top, then you find yourself in a position where what should have taken 5 minutes, now you have to split the routine. And splitting routines can be a big problem because what if some of the subroutines in your routine that you might want to move to somewhere else are called by other routines? So now, instead of just adding a couple of lines to this routine, I'm not only changing this routine, I'm breaking it in half, and I'm having to change maybe 5, 6, 12 other routines that all call in here. It can turn what should be a simple change into a big nightmare. So the FileMan team used to say they would cap out at 1,000 less than the current limit, and we probably want to do something like that. So that's effectively what happened here. I was going through patching, cleaning up here, and it bumped it over 20K, and I knew I had to split the routine. So you're going to see situations like this where some of the routines that are in the current draft that you guys are looking at in the Docker instance or in the repo are later going to be broken up into multiple routines. Some of them have already been broken up and are just about to be pushed or what have you. And in the process of breaking it up, we're also doing reorganizations of those routines to try to make it so that in the future it won't be so hard to split routines. Splitting routines is hard if you're writing, if you've got a module of your overall application and it's full of subroutines and anybody's allowed to call any subroutine they want, then what you end up with is sort of a rat's nest of this routine, calls that routine, which calls the other routine, but also 18 other routines call in here and all the others. Everybody's finger is in everybody's pies. And whenever you've got a scenario like that, if you're trying to split the routine, it has big ripple effects. So we've come up with a new structure that we're going to be following in places like this where it's an issue. And I'm going to bring up the before and after real quick. I did a class on this for our team, and I'm going to do it real quick now. I'm only going to take a minute because we're coming up on the end of the call. I'm just going to do enough to kind of show the picture of what it looks like. So this is SAMI Form 2 more or less as it exists now. And what you'll see is that some routines aren't called from the outside at all. The blue is the SAMI routine, the silver is who he calls, and the gold is who calls into him. So here's a subroutine that 3 guys call into, SAMI sub 2. And here's a collection of subroutines that SAMI case 2 calls into. So if I wanted to move these out to a different routine, I'd also have to change these guys who call it. it's a problem, right? It has a ripple effect. And this is a very modest example. This one is not particularly strongly knit together, but it's still strongly enough knit together that what should have been a simple split of the routine into two has turned into, well, now I have to change that routine, that routine, that routine, and that routine, as well as this routine in order to split it. It's a problem. So the solution to that is to shift to a new kind of structure. It's not new in the world, but it's new for this application. This is what we call, what we have here is what we call stage 2 application structure, in which it has grown to the point where the application has multiple modules, but they're each small enough that it's more or less one routine per module. So the home page was mostly handled by a single routine, the forms processor by a single routine, the case review page by a single routine, and so forth. But as it grows, it gets to the point where it hits that limit, and now it can't be one routine per module. And you get into the question of, well, how are you organizing the routines, and how are you organizing the calls between the routines? And so what we're doing is this. When we go from what that was stage 2 to what I'm calling stage 3 here, where you have true modules within the application, what we're going to do for each module is create a top-level library routine, and that is the only routine that other modules are allowed to call. I'm not talking about other applications. I mean, even within just our one application. So the rat's nest is eliminated. All these guys that previously could have been impacted if I were moving stuff around, they now only call SAMI form, and they'll only ever call SAMI form. And then SAMI form quickly shunts out to whatever the location is that we have put the code when we broke it up. So we put the form loader in one place, we put the direct mode interfaces in another place, and we put the web services in yet another place. And now we can reorganize this routine or rename these subroutines or do whatever we want until the end of time, until kingdom come, without ever having an impact on the guys who call us, because they only call this routine. So you're going to see some things like this. I know I'm at the top of the hour, and this is the last thing to show you is what it actually looks like when it's in use. In SAMI form, which is our new library routine that's replacing SAMI form 2, what you'll see are labels that look like this. Like fix href goes to fix href of SAMI FLD. I've timed the goto command. It's essentially free. It's so blindingly fast. So this doesn't cost us anything in terms of processing power. But what it gains us is the ability to untangle the relationships between the modules so that now if something grows too big and we have to split it, it no longer impacts the caller. The caller doesn't call the place where the code lives. He calls a little interface that lives in a library routine like this. So I've done this to SAMI form. I'm almost done with the work on it. Larry's been working on this on SAMI case, I believe. No, SAMI home. Maybe it's SAMI case. He's been working on both of them. And you'll see some of this in other places as well. So again, this helps to insulate us from renames, from reorgs, from splitting routines, from growth in size, and helps us to get in under that limit so XINDEX isn't unhappy. So I hope that this has been sort of at least a momentarily illuminating example of kind of some of the kinds of work that we're doing now. When we talk about cleanup and prepping, this is the kinds of things we're talking about, is getting everything so that it satisfies these limits and it's easy to validate. Back to you, Linda.
Thank you, Rick. So if anybody has especially more involved questions, please do just either send them to you can reply to the announcement for this meeting, or you can email one of us and we will get back to you. Any last comments? Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.